Hi guys, this is day 36 of 100 Days of Thankfulness, and today we're talking about the importance of marriage, and also I want to talk about why I'm so thankful for a good friend of mine, Tina Grapentine. So on the topic of the importance of marriage, obviously that's a real politically charged thing to be talking about. So I'm just going to let you know up front that I'm going to be sharing some verses out of the Bible as part of this video discussion. So if that's offensive to anyone, or if people have just heard enough of this, then I totally get it if you don't want to listen to this and you want to move on. But that being said, this morning I was actually looking at, and I kind of got a laugh out of this. They were talking about how they had pictures of four of our leaders that, you know, are trying to defend the sanctity of marriage, and yet it listed the number of marriages that each one had. And there was a comment saying, "I'm sorry if gay marriage attacks the sanctity of your fourth marriage." That statement actually made me laugh. It's like the saying goes, what you do speaks so loudly that what you say I cannot hear. And the reality is, you know, we all struggle to do what's right, and we all fall short. We're all in the same boat in that regard. Now, on the topic of gay marriage, there's, I think, two strong arguments for gay marriage, and, you know, the way I understand it, the first one is around the definition of marriage, and the second one is polygamy in the Bible. So the first one, and I'll just cover each one at a time, but the first one relates to, is marriage defined by man, or is marriage defined by God? I think if I personally believe that marriage was defined by man, then by all means I say, you know, let's do it. You know, I would change my profile picture to be the rainbow color. I would probably be I'm not gay, but you know, I would probably join in the parades and say, you know, this is the right thing to do. I'm not so convinced, and here's why. Matthew 19:3-9, this is Pharisees talking to Jesus. So it starts out, "Some Pharisees came to test him. They asked, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?' And Jesus' reply is, 'Haven't you read,' he replied, 'that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate.'" When I hear those words, and I'm kind of getting off topic right now for gay marriage for a moment, just because I want to share with you about what I've experienced in my own marriage, is, you know, that Karen and I, in a lot of ways, we have sort of become one person. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about James and Tina in that regard too. But for Karen and I, we just love spending time with each other. We love, you know, whenever she goes somewhere, like she'll go to even like a party where they'll be selling bags and purses and things like that, and I'll be like, "Can I come along too? I just want to be with you." There's this thing when you're united in that way, when you're united in flesh and you're united in your minds and your souls and everything, that you just want to be with that person all the time. And when you're not with them, for me anyways, I can be in agony, you know, especially if it's for an extended period of time. I was working as a contractor overseas, you know, and there was a period of time where I was in Ireland for 6 months, and I would be spending 2 weeks in Ireland and 2 weeks back, and 2 weeks in Ireland and 2 weeks back. That's kind of the way it was every month. And those 2 weeks in Ireland were really, really difficult on me. So I understand what that means, you know, for Jesus to say that, or to say, you know, they're no longer two but one flesh. Also, even like a lot of our interests, take taking, for example, Tina and James, when part of the reason I think Karen and I like hanging out with them is we have a lot of common interests, but especially like with James and Tina, they'll play video games together, and they'll just do everything together. And so then, since Karen and I are sort of the same way, the four of us, we kind of make a good team, because we just all like hanging out as a family, and our kids get along great. And that's kind of why I'm so thankful to know Tina in that regard, because she's a lot the same way. But she's even beyond that. I mean, the first time I met Tina was right before James and Tina were getting married, and she was just so open and so accepting to both Karen and I, giving us hugs. And she's a big hugger, and I love hugs, so that's great. But just so full of love, and so full of just being genuine and being, I think, pure in her marriage with James, in the same way that Karen is so pure with me as well. There's that importance, I think, around having a monogamous relationship, and I think here's where I'm going to get into the discussion around polygamy. But I hope at least people can understand, for that first point on the definition of marriage, I believe that God defined marriage. I believe that God, created marriage, and the next verses even reinforce that as well. But if someone doesn't believe that, like I said, I get it. I totally get it. I would probably be the same way. On the second point around polygamy, there's apparently a lot of confusion that people think that all the examples of polygamy in the Bible mean that polygamy is okay according to the Bible. Well, the first example we see of this is in Genesis 4, where Lamech had 2 wives. And there's not a whole lot that's said about that, but there's countless other examples of polygamy. Abraham also had children from their servant, and there was David's incident with Bathsheba. But when you look at Genesis 4, you also see that in Genesis 4, Cain kills his brother Abel. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that it's okay according to the Bible that we all go around killing each other. What we're seeing is, in Genesis 4, is we're starting to see the effects of the curse that we were all under, and the results of the sins. And so that's what's spoken of mostly in Genesis 4. And you see that example where Lamech had 2 wives. It just goes again to show that mankind is becoming more depraved. It certainly doesn't lift him up as this great example. And similarly with Abraham and his servant, that caused all kinds of problems for him to make that decision to do that. And certainly, with David and Bathsheba, he ended up committing adultery, and then he tried to cover up the secret, and then that didn't work. So then, he effectively had her husband killed, again, just to cover up the secret. And he later repented for that. Why would David repent for that if he believed that, according to God, that was okay? Clearly, it's not okay. And I think, the verses in 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 16, it couldn't even be more clear. This is Paul writing to the church of Corinth. Now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So obviously, you know, they're talking about sex here, and they're talking about a monogamous relationship, and they're talking about the dangers of adultery, which is, you know, would be to, you know, to have sex with someone other than your wife or your husband. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now what Paul's talking about there is Paul was not married, and so for him to say, I wish all men were as I am, he's effectively saying, I wish all men were single. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. I know some people are saying, what? But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So that's, you know, really where they're talking about, you know, if you can't handle being single, then by all means get married. But if you're going to be married, make sure it's a monogamous relationship. To the married I give this command, not I but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord, if any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. Do you see how, like, a lot of these verses, you know, Paul is being very careful to say a husband towards his wife, a wife towards his husband. The reason he is because at that time it was not accepted that men and women were equal at all within a marriage relationship. And here is, you know, where he's basically going against the norm by saying, you know, it's the same both ways. Husband towards the wife, wife towards the husband. Okay, so, and if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. For if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. A believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So that's it for today, and thanks once again to Tina.